Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right in today with a high-energy deep dive into the absolute roller coaster story of Lamborghini. We're going to explore exactly how a bruised ego built a legendary car company, and how that very same company fought off literally decades of financial ruin to become the cultural titan it is today. So, buckle up, because this is going to be one wild ride.
All right, let's kick things off with what has to be the ultimate spite hook in automotive history. So legend has it that Ferruccio Lamborghini, who is this highly successful, incredibly wealthy guy making a fortune building tractors after World War II, well, he took his personal Ferrari back to the factory in Maranello. He was super frustrated because its clutch just kept breaking. When he finally gets a face-to-face with the legendary Enzo Ferrari to offer, a little friendly engineering advice, Enzo supposedly dismisses him with pure aristocratic contempt. He basically tells Ferruccio that a tractor mechanic has absolutely no business trying to understand, let alone critique, a purebred sports car. Wow, right? Ferruccio was so deeply insulted by this arrogance that he made a monumental decision on the spot. He was going to build his own car company, purely to humiliate Enzo Ferrari. It's just the best origin story ever.
Which brings us to Section 1, the tractor maker's revenge.
You see, Ferruccio didn't just want to build a fast car. He wanted to build a significantly better one. And this perfectly sets up the ultimate tale of two bulls. When Ferruccio first started out, he actually had zero interest in racing. None. He thought factory racing teams were just a massive waste of money. Instead, he hired these brilliant engineers to build the 350 GT, which was a highly refined, totally civilized Grand Tour. He wanted a comfortable, incredibly smooth, usable car designed for high-speed cross-country driving that wouldn't just beat up the driver. But the company's DNA was almost immediately hijacked by a completely different instinct. We're talking about the urge to build outrageous, completely impractical, screaming, mid-engine spectacles designed to literally drop jaws. This fascinating push and pull between the sensible, refined Grand Tour and the wild, attention-grabbing showman, that is the central conflict defining their entire history.
Moving on to Section 2. Inventing the supercar. So this is exactly where the showman's side of Lamborghini grabs the wheel and totally shocks the automotive establishment. The real turning point hits in 1966. A rebellious little team of young, brilliant engineers at Lamborghini, including the legendary Gianpaolo Dallara, decided to just toss all conventional wisdom right out the window. Working late nights, completely behind Ferruccio's back, they developed a transverse mid-engine chassis. Now, you got to remember, up until this point, conventional wisdom absolutely dictated that a proper road car had its engine up front. Period. Putting it in the middle was strictly for the racetrack. But when they took this radical chassis and wrapped it in Marcello Gandini's stunning, impossibly low bodywork, it became the Miura. And the Miura, it completely shook the world. It was wide, aggressive, and looked like absolutely nothing else out there. It basically rewrote the rules of automotive design, invented the modern supercar template from scratch, and forced Ferrari, the very guy who insulted our tractor maker, to suddenly play a desperate game of catch-up. That leads us into Section 3, posters and financial ruin. Okay, here is where the story takes a massive, really paradoxical turn, starting with the defining car of the era, the Countach. The word itself is actually a Piedmontese exclamation of sheer astonishment, which, let's be honest, is exactly what people felt when they saw its outrageous wedge shape. I mean, it looked like a UFO had just landed on the street. It featured those revolutionary scissor doors that swung straight up, a design element that completely blew people's minds back then. This car totally abandoned comfort, rear visibility, and any sense of practicality for pure, unadulterated spectacle. And because of that, it became the ultimate symbol of extreme wealth and excess, cementing itself as the definitive poster on literally millions of teenage bedroom walls across the globe. It was gloriously uncompromising, completely impractical, and, well, undeniably iconic. But here's the great paradox of Lamborghini. While the Countach was ruling pop culture and defining automotive glamour for a whole generation, the company itself was completely falling apart behind the scenes. The 1970s and 80s were truly their wilderness years. Hit incredibly hard by the global oil crisis and economic downturns, Ferruccio actually ended up selling the company in the early 70s. By 1978, the firm was completely bankrupt and plunged into state receivership. They were constantly changing hands, bouncing from Swiss investors over to the Mimron brothers and eventually being sold off to the American giant Chrysler in 1987. Think about that for a second. They were quite literally fighting for simple day-to-day survival while simultaneously manufacturing and selling the most famous car in the entire world. Which leads us directly to this completely bizarre creation, the LM002.
affectionately known by everyone as the Rambo Lambo. In a desperate scramble for cash just to keep the factory lights on, Lamborghini decided to build a colossal luxury military off-roader, and they powered it with the massive V12 engine pulled straight out of the Countach. It was an absurd, freakish novelty at the time. I mean, it got absolutely terrible fuel economy, required these massive custom tires, and was mostly bought by eccentric celebrities and royalty. It was born out of pure corporate desperation. But surprisingly enough, as we'll see a bit later on, this strange little detour into luxury SUVs actually foreshadowed a massive company-saving payoff decades down the line.
Next up, Section 4, the blueprint for survival and the German rescue.
So, the brand sort of limped through the 1990s, relying almost entirely on the legendary Diablo. But management knew they needed a fundamental change if they were going to survive long-term. They recognized pretty early on that they simply couldn't stay afloat by only selling a handful of wildly expensive V12 supercars every year. The strategy required a smaller bowl, basically a slightly cheaper, higher volume car to generate steady cash flow. But man, early attempts were disastrous. The Urus in the 70s and the Jalpa in the 80s both completely failed to hit true high-volume production. And they didn't fail because the cars were bad ideas, but purely due to a complete lack of corporate stability and proper development funds. Every single time they tried to launch a smaller car, the company simply ran out of money. They had the absolute right strategy, but entirely the wrong bank balance.
And then, the true climax of the survival story arrives. In 1998, Audi, backed by the massive financial might of the Volkswagen Group, acquires Lamborghini. This was the definitive turning point. Audi brought exactly what the Italian firms so desperately lacked: massive reserves of cash, rigorous German engineering discipline, and world-class standardized quality control. Suddenly, the cars would actually start every time you turned the key. But the big dramatic question hanging over the automotive world was this: would all this strict corporate oversight sand down the rough edges, tame the madness, and ultimately kill the wild Italian soul of the raging bull?
Let's find out in Section 5, the profitable mainstream.
Well, the answer to that question was a resounding no. Audi's arrival finally allowed Lamborghini to execute their master plan flawlessly. 14,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the sheer scale of the Gallardo's success. With Audi's backing and engineering support, Lamborghini finally built the smaller bull properly. The Gallardo was a usable, relatively accessible, entry-level V10 supercar that you could actually drive every single day without it constantly breaking down. And the market responded massively, selling over 14,000 units. To put that into perspective, that was more cars than the company had sold in its entire previous existence combined. It was a total game changer that permanently balanced the books.
This massive success allowed them to build a really brilliant modern strategy. By sharing under-the-skin platforms and tech with the broader VW group, they saved billions in research and development while ensuring incredible build quality and huge profit margins. This meant the high-volume V10 models, like the Gallardo and later the Huracan, could generate highly reliable, consistent profits. And what exactly do they do with those profits? They use them to fund the outrageous, uncompromising, fire-breathing V12 flagships like the Aventador. They also started churning out these crazy, limited-edition, multi-million-dollar few-offs just to keep the brand's prestige and theatricality cranked up to the absolute maximum. Basically, the sensible cars funded the crazy cars.
But hey, if you thought 14,000 was a huge number, wait until you hear this one. 20,000. That is the production number for the Urus SUV, a milestone they hit in just a few short years. Remember the Rambo Lambo we talked about earlier? The Urus is its direct modern descendant. When Lamborghini announced they were making a practical, family-friendly SUV, sports car purists were completely furious. They called it an absolute heresy that would destroy the brand. But guess what? The market absolutely loved it. It became the ultimate financial savior, instantly doubling the company's entire production volume and pouring immense wealth right back into the factory, ensuring they have the cash to keep funding their extreme supercars for decades to come. Which brings us to Section 6, electrifying the raging bull. So just when Lamborghini achieved total financial dominance and stability, a new massive existential crisis emerged: incredibly strict global emissions regulations. Which brings us to the absolute ultimate question facing the brand today. How do you electrify a screaming V12 engine without losing the company's soul? I mean, when your entire brand identity, your literal reason for existing, is built on dramatic noise, heat, and mechanical violence, how do you possibly confront the shift to a silent, highly efficient electric age? Well, their answer is brilliantly defiant. Enter the Rivalwelto. Instead of downsizing the engine, adding quiet turbochargers, or just bowing completely to efficiency, Lamborghini utilized supercapacitors and plug-in hybrid technology to do something totally different. They used it to amplify performance. Supercapacitors can discharge energy incredibly rapidly, providing this explosive acceleration that perfectly fills any gaps in the torque curve of that massive naturally aspirated V12. They didn't add electricity to make some quiet commuter car. They added it to preserve their sacred V12, making it accelerate harder, shift more violently, and roar even louder. They're literally using the electric future to make the combustion engine faster and more theatrical than it has ever been. But this leaves us with a final, provocative thought to end our journey on today. Despite these brilliant hybrid solutions, eventually fully electric vehicles are coming for everyone. Will a completely silent Lamborghini still possess the power to stop a busy street in its tracks? Can the drama, the passion, and the shock value truly survive without the mechanical noise? It's a fascinating question for the future of the brand. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you walk away with a totally new understanding of the Raging Bull. See you next time.